resist a gag. Comparing himself to James Bond, we'll ask what other movies filmed there best reflect today's speech. For that, we'll be consulting our A-list stars tonight, Kate Fall and Jeevun Sandher, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, today was Keir Starmer's mission statement, setting out milestones on which his government can be judged. And look, it's hard to argue with a lot of them. So, for example, improving living standards for every part of the United Kingdom, building 1.5 million new homes, ending hospital backlogs, more bobbies on the beat, improving early years education. But still, things felt slightly topsy-turvy today. Now, you know that saying about doing the right things in the wrong order. Today felt a bit like a manifesto launch, or the kind of speech you do on the steps of Downing Street when you're just moving in for the first time. Usually, Prime Ministers set out their priorities and targets first, and then announce a budget focused on making them happen. Now, as we'll explore in the programme this evening, some of those milestones actually seem to be harder to reach as a direct result of that fiscal statement. Keir Starmer says this isn't a reset, but perhaps it's an attempt to draw a line under a budget that does continue to generate headlines for the wrong reasons. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has our first report on Keir Starmer's mission statement.
A new slogan and the stage set for a Prime Minister with a new script. Here at movie-making Pinewood Studios to kickstart his government after what's been anything but a box office opening.
Today we publish new milestones, measurable milestones, that will also give the British people the power to hold our feet to the fire.
6 targets to judge his government, raising living standards, ending hospital backlogs, building 1.5 million new homes, targets too on policing, education and green energy.
Make no mistake, this plan will land on desks across Whitehall with the heavy thud of a gauntlet being thrown down.
The PM says it's the most ambitious plan for government in a generation, challenging the British state to deliver.
I do think that too many people in Whitehall are comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline.
He says he's taken the fight to blockers and will build 150 major infrastructure projects he knows voters want and need to see his government getting things done.
I'm convinced that if we can show that politics can change Britain for the better, then we can face the future with confidence.
But in this plan, one massive issue conspicuously missing: no concrete target on tackling immigration. You have not given the public one metric on which to measure you when it comes to migration. Is that because you fear failure?
No, Beth. The way we've constructed it is that there are foundational things that a government must do, and they are based on security. So national security is obvious, but border security is equally obvious in my view, and that's why I've said we are committed to bringing down immigration, both legal and illegal.
And ministers defensive. People are really concerned about migration. There is no measurable, there's nothing on the banners. What on earth is going on? I think that could come back to bite you, couldn't it?
Well, we've had record numbers of people deported that shouldn't have been here, over 9,000 since we got...
Top priority for the public and nothing in... Nothing on them. Why is it not a milestone on which the public can measure you if it is such a priority for this government, which apparently Keir Starmer keeps telling me it is? It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's the underpinnings of everything else we do. So it's clearly, therefore, a central priority for the government and certainly for me as Home Secretary.
First there were 5 missions, then there were 6 steps, 2 priorities and now 6 milestones. It has at times been a bit confusing. What is the message? Well, today the Prime Minister has announced 6 targets, tangible targets for you to measure his government on in an attempt to reset with the public and communicate better with you. It's in places like Bishop Stortford that he needs this message to land. Traditionally Tory, voters here back Labour in the election.
Well, I think the dog would make more sense to the politicians, frankly. No, seriously, I think we're let down by all sides of the parties.
I think they've got the right intentions, but they're struggling to get their message across, I think, is the problem.
Yeah, I think they're struggling at the moment. They are proving to be rather unpopular with their cuts to certain benefits.
This may be the season of goodwill, but there's not much of it about for this new government. The Prime Minister hopes over time hitting milestones might change all of that, but he has to deliver. Beth, Rigby, Sky News.
Well, it's been a day with an awful lot of data to chew over. Earlier, I caught up with the man who loves data, data and economics editor, Ed Conway.
So I love data, I love numbers. So apparently does the Prime Minister, because he gave us a lot of targets before the election, after the election, and now we've got new targets coming in. And some of it, some of it's quite interesting. Like, it's worth just saying the first one, because it's perhaps the one that we've talked about the most, because it was the most eye-catching, was we are going to have the fastest growth rate in the G7. And it was so bold at the time that they announced this, I think kind of a year and a bit ago. I remember thinking, well, that's just kind of next to impossible. And if you look at the forecast from the International Monetary Fund for the next few years, so this is actually covering the Parliament, and it's a verdict on the UK. This is showing you the range of different growth rates within the G7, from the fastest, which is usually America. America just tends to grow faster than everyone else, through to the slowest, which is usually Italy. I'm afraid to say, any Italians watching, but sometimes it's us, sometimes it's Japanese, and the UK, we are basically in the middle. And so there is not a single year within the next Parliament, according to the IMF, when we are going to be the fastest growth rate.
And this looks tricky. This looks very tricky to me.
We're quite a way off the fastest in each year. And actually, if you look at, so there's two ways of measuring it, but the government was a little unclear as to which one it was going to focus on. That's overall GDP, just the total amount of income we're generating in each of our economies. Then you can divide it by the number of people. So GDP per capita, per head. That's the same story. So that's GDP per capita, and actually we're a little bit further off the fastest there. So, yeah, I mean, that target, it seems impossible, basically.
So, given that it seems impossible, that realistically we're not going to be growing as fast as America, have they got like a fudge? Is there another target that they're looking at when it comes to
it would be nice if we could.
I mean, that sounds great. Obviously, who knows? Maybe it would be fine.
All of our problems. So but it would be great if that did happen. But yeah, instead of this, they're focusing on something else. But, it seems like a sensible metric, which is, it's called real household disposable income per head. It's the amount of money that we have in our pockets, basically, after you account for taxes and everything else. And on this front, so this is just the last few years, it went down a lot. That's, you've got your energy price shock, and that was really tough for people. And this shouldn't really fall. And in the next year, it just needs to go up over that period. So anything above the line is a pass, anything below the line is a fail. And already it was heading up even before the budget. So it was heading up quite comfortably, partly after the bounce, after the fall during the energy price shock. What's interesting, and perhaps a challenge to the Labour Party and to the government, is that after the budget, so bear in mind this includes if you're paying taxes, how much they dig into your finances. After the budget, look at what happened to the line. So wow. It's still going up, but look, that's taxes coming in, national insurance, VAT, everything else coming in.
So their budget, just to be really clear, the budget has made this worse.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is based on numbers from the Office of Budget Responsibility, so official numbers. The budget has made the picture for real household disposable income per head, which is their latest target. It's made it worse than it otherwise was, but they're still in the pass, sector. So that's a pass.
This is probably a pass then. Yeah. The other big pledge today was about.
By the way, it would be catastrophic if they failed that, because that's I don't think we've ever had a parliament where we've properly kind of gone down.
It's kind of election losing territory, right? What about police? Because there was a big one about that.
There's a few, and the police one. I mean, so. The idea is more bobbies on the beat, basically. And this line is showing you the number that you've got in England and Wales, police officers who can be out there on the streets. That was, the plan was, or the hope is, that goes up by 13,000, okay, which sounds like a big number. But it is worth saying, if you take that kind of trajectory, so that the direction it's travelling in, even bearing in mind a little dip there, and just kind of follow that on, then the current trajectory is actually going higher than that. It's not to say, listen, it's not to say that 13,000 isn't ambitious, and actually talk to people within the sector and they're like, well, it is actually hard to get hold of people. But nonetheless, that looks like one of those things which might have already might have happened anyway.
So it's achievable.
Yeah.
NHS.
NHS. This one looks tougher, just because. So this is showing you its percentage of routine elective operations within 18 weeks. So how quickly are you being seen to? And it used to be you could get through within 18 weeks for 92% of the time, around 90-ish% of the time. And then obviously everyone can see the pandemic.
This is COVID. This is the COVID line.
Yeah, it's
extraordinary.
But what's terrifying about it isn't just that, but it's the fact that it stayed low.
And it hasn't recovered.
And it hasn't recovered. And so I think, getting up to 92%, which is the challenge here, that line is going to be...
That's a steep line.
That's going to be extraordinary if that can be achieved. But it's worth saying, for Keir Starmer, it's like, we're giving you the NHS lots of money, and here's what you're supposed to go off and do. And whether that message gets through, I guess we have to see.
And that's what they're asking us to judge them on at the end of the day. Ed, thank you very much indeed, Ed Conway. Right, so we've had Beth's analysis, we've had Ed's analysis. What are the government saying? Earlier, I spoke to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall. Thank you very much for being on the programme. So, talk to me about today. What was it all about?
It's about saying to people, being pretty direct with them, this is how you can judge us. If your living standards are improving, if you're able to get seen in the NHS on time, if your streets are safer and you've got a named accountable police officer, if we have clean homegrown energy by the end of the Parliament. And for me, the really, really important thing of a record number of children starting school ready to learn. This is how we will improve people's lives, and they'll judge us at the next election. They will judge us for good or for ill. Yeah, hopefully for good. We intend to deliver, yeah.
So you've got 6 milestones, 3 foundations, 5 missions. I mean, how are you remembering them all? If you've got flashcards, you're scribbling them on the back of your hand?
I don't see it as that complicated. There are some just basics. Economic stability, secure borders and national security. That's just the basics, OK? And then we have some really long-term challenges that we are focusing on as a country, as a government for the country. But this is saying to people, this is the real concrete difference, the things that matter most to you. And, there's been some criticism they're not that ambitious. But actually, if my constituents' living standards were improving, they had a home, they could call their own, they could get seen in the NHS and they felt safe, that would be a transformation.
There's one thing that I guess I'm slightly struggling to get my head around today, because you're putting forward these 6 milestones, these 6 priorities that, as you say, you can be measured and judged on. But they seem, I guess, a bit out of step with the budget, which is your big policy platform that you've actually done so far. So take growth, right? One of your top missions to kickstart economic growth, your top milestone, raising living standards, higher sustained growth in the G7. But the impact of the budget is to reduce growth in the medium term.
So I don't agree with that. I think that the budget involves some really hard, difficult decisions because we had to sort out the public finances. And I think anybody who's gone in to run a business or a charity or a public sector organisation knows if you go in and you're spending more than you're bringing in, you're never going to be able to make big changes because you've got to get that right first. And there were some real things that helped people in the budget to put more money in their pockets. The rise in the minimum wage, 22 billion for the NHS. That is absolutely at the heart of this document.
Growth, which is one of the things you're asking us to judge you on, and the budget was not good for growth. And your milestone on growth to raise living standards in every part of the country. We can have a look now at some analysis that our economics editor Ed Conway's done on the budget impact on raising those living standards. So if we can just have a look now, this is disposable income. So that's literally what you're asking us to judge you on. And you can see before the budget, it was better. The budget's made it worse. So it just feels like you're just out of step with...
No, I really see this as this sort of once in a parliament, deal with the problems. And I know that's been difficult. It's been extremely...
Can't just say, oh, look, these are our milestones, but just ignore that one massive thing we did with the budget.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because you have got to, if you are spending more than you're earning, you've got to sort out the public finances. That is what Rachel Reeves has done. But crucially...
But your budget is at odds with your stated priorities.
She has also put in place the longer-term decisions to get the fundamental investment we need
But
in
that's
this
not-
country's infrastructure
you see,
to get it growing
but the
again.
budget's made it harder for you to meet these milestones. You know, it's like, you know, saying you're going to meet the milestones, but you're just going to tie your legs together
I
at
don't
the
agree.
beginning.
Well, certainly, 22 billion for the NHS is going to make it easier for us to hit our target of 92% of patients being seen within 18 weeks. That's really important. And actually, sorting out your budget, making sure you're not spending more than you're bringing in. You can't build the change that we need unless you've got those firm foundations, and that's what the budget did.
Well, let's take another milestone and look at the budget impact. One that I know that you feel very strongly about, giving children the best start in life, with a record 75% of 5-year-olds in England ready to learn when they start school. But the budget made things harder for childcare providers. They're going to be hit by the national insurance changes. They're also going to be impacted by the minimum wage. And it's not just me saying it. Juna Sullivan, Leaf, for example, who runs that wonderful nursery, is brilliant.
Fantastic.
She tweeted to say that the national insurance rise is a huge burden for us. Is the government trying to kill the early years sector?
Definitely not. You know, it's a sector that we want to champion, and I know that those the details of those settlements will come out in the usual way. But what I want to say is why this is just so important.
I know why it's important. I'm not disputing why it's important, but what I'm saying is you've got this aim and the budget is not helping you meet the milestones. So should we judge you on what you say or what you do?
But we've also put over £1 billion extra into those early years services and support. And there's big reforms we also have to make. That was at the heart of this, about how we work with health visitors and midwives in the various early years. You know that pregnancy, the first year of life, that's a really, really critical point. And we've put £22 billion extra into the NHS. So I know there were difficult decisions in the budget to make sure that we balance the books. That's been tough. The reason we call it a difficult decision isn't just some cliche, it's because it's difficult. But that's the foundation we've got to build on. And there are big plans to expand or create new 3,000 nursery places. I think that's so important including in our schools.
Do you think
that will make a big difference?
Do you think that the government should look again at some of the impact of the budget on early years providers? Because they're saying things are really tough, right? I've spoken to, you know, Zoe Raven of Acorn Nurseries on the show recently. She says, look, this budget is really, really hard.
And the details of that funding and those allocations will be made by the Education Secretary. And I know she's really, really aware of the pressures that nurseries and other childcare providers are under. But we have also put that extra investment in. And the reason this is so important is because poorest children in my constituency start school up to 18 months behind their better-off peers. And when that happens, they are playing catch-up for the rest of their lives. You know, I've campaigned for this issue of every child starting school ready to learn for probably 20 years. This is a huge change. This would probably be the biggest change that we see in terms of equality and opportunity. Extra money is going into the system, real reform too, not just into childcare, but into the NHS. And together that will make a big difference.
You talked there about the poorest children being left behind at a very early age. And in your milestone of giving children the best start in life, you say, critically, this means tackling the scar of child poverty, which limits opportunities and holds back life chances. And yet in the budget, again, I'm going back to the budget, you decided to keep one of the main drivers of child poverty, which is a 2-child cap on benefits.
Well, we will be producing our bold and ambitious cross-government strategy on tackling child poverty.
You can see
spring.
where I'm going here.
Yeah, but let me say...
Your big thing was the budget, and yet if you look at many of these things on childcare, on child poverty, on growth, you're at odds.
You're not. But you're picking one thing. You're not saying that we actually extended the Household Support Fund, including for the poorest families, by £1 billion this year. We introduced our new fair repayment rate in universal credit, slashing the deductions,
Gordon Brown
gives the poorest
says the 2-child limit is condemning children to poverty and it should be scrapped.
I am under no illusions as to what the social security system and the Tories changes have done to child poverty. I've got a third of kids in my constituency growing up poor. But the change, our new fair repayment rate, gives 1.2 million of the poorest households, on average, £420 a year. There is more to do. We will produce that strategy in the spring. But it's not just social security. Because the only way to tackle child poverty in the long term is get more people into better paid jobs, which is what I'm trying to do in my department and what we're trying to do by getting growth in every corner of the country.
So we've got these targets, these milestones, as you say. What happens if you don't meet them?
Well, the public will make their views clear in the ballot box. That is the beauty of our great British democracy.
OK, thank you very much indeed. You there with Liz Kendall. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Conservative peer, Baroness Kate Fall, and the Labour MP, Jeevun Sandher. Great to have you both with us today. I'm interested to get your perspective, right? You're kind of a new Labour MP. You've got to get out there and sell this message. What did you think about the milestones today?
Well, we're setting out really clearly what the mission will look like at the next election, how we're going to make people's lives better. The planning reform for 1.5 million new homes, early years childcare, police back on our streets, getting NHS waiting times down. There's a huge thing that makes us better off. But of course, building more homes, getting lower energy bills for all in a healthier workforce, that means more money in people's pockets. We are delivering on what we were planning to do before government. I'm incredibly excited. This is not just about rebuilding our country, but it's also about rebuilding hope.
And Kate, they're saying it's not a reset, but, you know, it reminds me a lot about, you know, Rishi Sunak kind of setting out his, you know, his big targets, of course, and it didn't seem to go too well. You know, do you think that we have these kind of big speeches with new targets if Prime Ministers are doing well?
Yeah, so first of all, you don't want to reset in your first year in government anyway. So I think that shows that there's a sort of lack of momentum. You talked about the budget in some of your interviews. There's a sense that the budget, which was a big set piece, here's how we're going to get Britain growing and here's how we're going to deliver, didn't really take off in the way they wanted. That's the first thing. The second thing is about the targets. I mean, there's some really good targets there, but just the idea of using that as a political device, I thought was a bit strange. They did come back to haunt Rishi, and what I'd like to see from a government at the beginning is to set up a bigger sort of narrative about what they wanted to do and to really look at some of these big policy problems for the country and a sort of long-term plan, if you like, because you've got to do that at the beginning of the electoral cycle, not at the end. So I think they're going to get taken up with these targets rather than thinking about how we're going to solve some of these problems, how we're going to get Britain growing again, how we're going to sort out the NHS. And again, some things off the list like migration, but also sort of long-term sickness, massive amount of people sitting out of work when they should be back at work.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. Look, our missions were the most detailed pre-manifesto programme of government this country's ever seen. Well over 100 pages across those 5 missions. These 6 milestones are part of what we want to achieve at the next election, by the next election, but they are by no means a subtotal of our ambitions. And absolutely, there are plans to do so, but also a way for the civil service to get round and say what we're going to deliver.
Do you accept that the budget didn't go completely to script?
The budget absolutely showed how we're going to rebuild the foundations. I thought it was a great budget. By the way, there were certain things about the growth forecasting we should clear up. The first of which is that our planning reforms are not included within those growth forecasts. I think that's about £600 a year, 1% of GDP. Secondly, the graph you showed earlier, that was the impact of the budget. That was the forecast of the March budget, and then afterwards, of course, the forecast can deteriorate for other reasons, of course, including of which the £22 billion financing gap. That budget absolutely has started to set out how we're going to turn this country around and money behind the milestones we set out today.
The Ed Conway graph is on the most recent budget.
Yeah, so after the budget, but the line of before the budget was out the March budget. So it doesn't show the impact of the budget, it shows the difference in the forecast. So I think 2 things we should bear in mind. First and foremost, all of our growth-enhancing policies were not inside the forecast. Secondly, of course, that forecast can change. But thirdly, that doesn't show the impact of the budget, it shows the difference between 2 different forecasts.
We're talking about targets. You, of course, work for David Cameron. You could say that the target that David Cameron set on migration that he obviously famously didn't meet was almost, it's kind of gone down in history of an example of terrible targets. Do you think that's something to learn from?
Sorry, if you look at the beginning of the coalition government, that's an example of, I think, a good beginning to a government where they had a very clear mandate. They came together as 2 parties to sort of fix the financial crisis, and that was really the glue that bound the coalition, and they sort of marched in one direction on that. The target on migration, I think he would admit, it became the focus that we kept on missing that target, rather than really talking about, so what do we need for the country, what do we need for the economy, what sort of migration do we want? And I feel feel that that's the problem with setting all these targets, rather than thinking, we're a new government, what are we trying to achieve, what's the big picture, and let's start solving some of Britain's problems?
Do you think that? I mean, it is targets, you know. Why would you do it to yourself?
Well, look, that's what happened at the... But I want to go back to the 2010 coalition government, right? The worst fall in wages since Napoleon. I've never really known a growing economy, and I'm getting a lot older. I'm getting greys. I'm 34 years old. The highest NHS waiting list in history. So whatever narrative there was back in the early 2010s, it made our country much worse as part of what we're fixing. These 6 targets represent the things that we want to achieve, to bind the civil service around, a huge amount of work for us to do, and the budget put money behind that.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Well, of course, the government's plan for change is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Times' chief political correspondent, Aubrey Allegretti, and the Financial Times' Whitehall editor, Lucy Fisher. Right, we're joined by our political editor, Beth Rigby. Beth, you've literally just hot-footed, I have to say. She's just been recording the podcast from another studio and she's literally just ran in to give us a...
Tiptoed in.
Tiptoed, you did actually.
I did, I tiptoed in.
She snuck in like magic.
I didn't want to disrupt everything, but...
So if you've had a sort of breath, a kind of moment to kind of reflect on the speech that you were at earlier, what's your sort of main takeaway?
I think that it's a government that understands that people are tired of politics, that politics is broken, that there's an anti-politics sentiment in the country, and that I think it's a Prime Minister that understands that he has to try and give something measurable to his audience in order to try and prove to people that he isn't like the other politicians. I think that that is the framing of it, and I think that the Prime Minister's actually quite sincere in that. I think when you get into the nuts and bolts of what it is, we were talking about this earlier, I cover this stuff all the time, you cover this stuff all the time. From the missions to the first steps to now 3 foundations and 6 measurable milestones, some of which are different from the first steps announced in the manifesto. It's a bit confusing. It's a bit confusing to work out what is the narrative, what are you actually trying to do? I think he, in his mind, is quite clear about it, and he keeps going back to making life better for working people. But I think if you're watching it, and certainly if you're covering it, there's just lots of things being bandied about, and it's like, what is this about?
It's almost like the story, do you think, the narrative?
And I think that they are prepared for what they would describe perhaps as a tsunami of cynicism. That's what someone said to me, that they kind of expected they might get back today. I think the view within Number 10 is that if he can deliver on some of these targets, and some of them are really ambitious. 1.5 million homes, another 150 infrastructure projects. How hard have those been to get off the ground? Getting waiting lists back down to 92% of people being seen in 18 weeks, not hit. It was an NHS standard, not hit in a decade. So, you know, green power by 2030. They are actually pretty ambitious, some of them less so, like the raising disposable household income. That's an already expectation of this Parliament. So I think that they are potentially, if he can deliver them, maybe he can make that pact with the public. But I think there is a communication issue here. And the other thing I would say, and I asked him at the event today, there is not a measurable milestone on migration. And given that this government said it was one of their top 2 priorities, and they know that the public is very agitated by it and feel that these have been a litany of broken promises, to not put it in your measurables, even if he's put it in his foundations, is everyone keeping up? This is the point. It's quite confusing. I think when it comes to priorities, I think there might be some voters out there that feel that this is not a priority for him. And I think that that politically could be a problem when it's such a potent issue for voters. And it is one in which Nigel Farage, who could well have a big resurgence in the local elections, in the Holyrood elections, in the Senate elections in Scotland and Wales, respectively, in 2026, they will use that to weaponise against Keir Starmer. So he really does have his work cut out. They don't call it a reset. I thought it might be a fresh start. I think it's probably not quite either. I think it's another stepping stone, if you like, for a government that is trying to earn back the trust of the public with an understanding that that could take some time, if achievable at all.
OK, Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there, our political editor. Now, I did just want to bring you a little bit of breaking news that is coming through to us this hour as we've been reporting on Keir Starmer's speech, because an earthquake has been felt widely across northern California and authorities have issued a tsunami warning. Now, the quake struck at 10:44 in the morning, that is 6:44 p.m. UK time, west of Ferndale, a small city near the Oregon border. Now, those details coming through to us from the US Geological Survey. It's apparently been felt as far south as San Francisco, where residents felt a rolling motion for several seconds, and it was then followed by some smaller aftershocks. That tsunami warning covering 5.3 million people. The US Geological Survey said it's a yellow alert, which predicts localised but minimal damage. Now, in the last few minutes, we have also heard the quake was 39 miles off the California shore, and that the California Governor Office have said the governor has been briefed on the earthquakes off the coast and is currently meeting with state emergency officials right now. We'll bring you more on this as we get it. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up after the break, we are going to be talking to our panel, Kate Fall and Jeevun Sandher.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first. Help is slowly reaching these places. It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust. This is a picture of destruction. Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello, welcome back. Well, tonight we are talking about the Prime Minister's plan for change that he unveiled earlier today. Now, before coming on air, I got some reaction from the Shadow Home Office Minister, Matt Vickers. Thank you very much for being on the programme this evening. What did you make of Keir Starmer's announcement today?
Well, it's the 17th reset, isn't it? We've had the priorities, the pledges, the milestones, the millstones and everything else. I think it was disappointing that immigration wasn't one of them. I think it's one of the biggest issues I hear on the doorsteps from people. It's something that people are really concerned about. I thought that would have been one of the biggest priorities that he would need to put forward. But the reality is, we also saw a bit of backpedaling on growth. He told us we were going to have the highest sustained growth in the G7. Now, all of a sudden, he's backtracking on that. And we're seeing the impact in the economy of what happened with the budget. We did have the fastest growing economy in the G7 when the Labour Party took over. But now, actually, we're in a bit of a tough place.
It wasn't that fast, though, was it?
It was the fastest growing in the G7.
What was the actual growth levels?
But it
bumping
was the
along
fastest
the
growing.
bottom.
Well, all sorts of stimulus affect economies, but they're affecting the globe. We saw what happened with global prices on energy, etc. But in real terms,
you can't say 0.something% growth is a great triumph. Come on, it wasn't like you handed over.
It was the best in the G7.
Escalating, rocketing growth.
The fastest in the G7. But what's happening now? We're seeing business confidence through the floor. Today we've seen that feedback from the Bank of England, who spoke to employers, and the vast majority of employers now feel that they are going to have to put their prices up, that wages are going to go down, that they're going to be able to employ less people. All very bad news for the economy. And it's bad news for public services as well, because without that growth, without those people working, we will not be able to improve public services.
You said that you were disappointed that immigration wasn't talked about today. So do you think there should be a target set then on net migration? Is that what you're saying?
I think, do you know what? Immigration is way too high. We saw Kemi tell us about that last week. Consecutive governments have let people down on immigration. Kemi's committed to putting that cap in place. We really do need to do so. It's not acceptable. It has a huge cost to the public.
What should the cap be? What should it be?
I think it depends where we are at the time, doesn't it? I think I wouldn't like to set a cap now.
But I guess that's what I'm sort of saying, though. You know, you're saying that Keir Starmer should set out, a milestone
have a plan,
on migration. But then, in that case, then what should it be? What should net migration be?
Well, it should be significantly less than it is. We should be doing something to tackle those people who come across
Tens
those
of
boats
thousands,
illegally.
like Cameron?
The numbers are going up.
Didn't it?
Since Labour got in office, the numbers have gone up by 20. There are 23% more people crossing the Channel. We're opening more hotels to house migrants. That has a real impact on communities across the country. And it also has a huge impact on the public purse, a huge cost to the public. We want to see more invested in the NHS. We want to see more invested in police. And actually, it's all getting eaten up on this problem.
Matt Vickers there with the Conservative response to Keir Starmer's big speech today. Coming up next on the Politics Hub.
The plan for change then takes them forward with measurable milestones so that the public can see whether we're making the progress that we need to make in the missions. But the foundation is still the foundational stone on which this is built.
A man on a mission, but will the Prime Minister's message hit home with voters? We'll discuss that next. Hello, welcome back. Now, we've talked a lot on the programme about the substance of Keir Starmer's speech today. But like it or not, politics is often as much about how you say something as what you're saying. So let's just take a listen to some of what the Prime Minister did say today.
In that country first spirit, we change our plan, a plan for change, a plan that does two things at the same time. First, it doubles down on our national mission. However, to drive those missions forward in this Parliament and show our progress towards them, today we publish new milestones. On those strong foundations, we rebuild Britain with our national missions, driven forward in the harsh light of accountability by the milestones for this Parliament. The missions are then the additional things that we want the government to do, the change that we want to bring about, and that's why we set them out in our manifesto. Each of the chapters in our manifesto was an example of how we would deliver that, and the plan for change then takes them forward with measurable milestones so that the public can see whether we're making the progress that we need to make in the missions. But the foundation is still the foundational stone on which this is built.
Right, let's get the view of an expert, shall we? Simon Lancaster was a speechwriter for ministers in the last Labour government. He's now gone on to write speeches for CEOs. He's even written a book on the art of speechwriting. So he's the man we need to talk to about this. What did you make of Keir Starmer's efforts today?
Sophie, can I just say one of my lifetime ambitions is to see the word metaphor in a headline on Sky News. So this, for me, as a rhetoric geek, this is my ambition for 2024.
We aim to please.
I love it. I'm a very happy man. But indeed, my big problem with the speech today was that he mixed his metaphors. And I think this is part of what Beth was alluding to when she talked about the narrative not coming through quite clearly, that it's through metaphors that we create strong narratives. If you think about Donald Trump and his line, or Boris Johnson with his oven-ready deals, these were examples of great clear metaphors where you're planting movies in your mind. Whereas what Starmer was doing in his speech today, he muddled them, and so it was all about the foundations and buildings, but then it was milestones, so you had no clear image and you just left with a mess.
So you didn't think he did a good enough job of kind of setting out the kind of narrative. Do you think there's an argument, I guess, that, you know, he's all about delivery, is quite managerial, but there's not enough, I guess, kind of poetry about this government?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say the poetry, actually. I think his writers are good, and they use all of the kind of poetic, literary and rhetorical devices that you would expect. There's things like the rule of three, there's repetition, some smart little parallelism in there, like, you know, the country first, party second. But for me, the thing that is really lacking with Keir, and we've seen this in reset after reset, is he just lacks that passion, you know, and I think people across the country at the moment really are genuinely crying out for change. They are hungry for change. And when you think about change prime ministers, you know, you think about Margaret Thatcher with fire in her eyes, talking about the ladies not for turning. Or I remember Tony Blair at Labour Party conference with his shirt literally drenched with sweat as he talked about fighting the forces of conservatism. Or even you think of Boris with his clenched fists talking about getting Brexit done. Whereas with Keir, he feels to me like kind of a middle manager at like PwC or Ernst & Young, no disrespect to PwC or Ernst & Young, who's trying to convince the board of the need to take on some change program. And it's not the kind of passion or messaging that you want from a national leader at a time like this.
So other than the sweaty shirt, if you like, what would your advice be for Keir Starmer? What kind of things could he do?
I think he really needs to tap into his passion. And I mean, there are techniques that I use with some of my clients to get them feeling passionate. And, you know, a lot of it is just getting them in the right mood beforehand. So sometimes I get them to think of a time when they felt really passionate and energized before in their life, and then recreate that image like really clearly in their mind so they can see it like they're there then. And then hopefully they'll go like bursting out onto the stage and they'll feel some of that energy. You know, I don't know when Keir Starmer feels passionate, maybe when he's just scored a goal, if he thinks of something like that when he's speaking. But
yeah,
he
try and get a
always
bit of that
seems...
Try and get a bit of that kind of Arsenal passion, maybe might be the one. Thank you so much. It's been really fascinating to talk to you. So thank you for coming on Politics Hub this evening.
Thank you, Sophie.
Right, let's get the thoughts of Kate and Jeevun, shall we? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because, look, I mean, some politicians would be like, look, this should be about delivery. This is what people really care about. And, of course, that is true. But, you know, politics is a performance business as well, isn't it? Kate, how do you think Keir Starmer is?
So I think it is a bit managerial. I mean, we had Boris with all the jam tomorrow and the vision and no delivery, and then we had Rishi went the other way. And I think Keir Starmer is struggling to win the hearts with a sort of overall vision and a narrative, even though I think he is being earnest, he is trying to, you know, find a pathway to improve the country. But I think the danger is that he doesn't really have an overall sense of what the direction, what he wants to take the country. And then back to the targets, it all feels quite micro rather than what are the big problems, how do we solve them? And again, a few things missing from there. We talked about migration and growth.
What would you say to that?
There's been quite a lot of drama over the past few years, right? And now we have a serious, sober government that is delivering. More broadly, what people are going to judge at the next election is whether or not we are going to get living standards rising, NHS waiting list down. I think today they saw Prime Minister very serious about that. So it is about a mission-driven government. It is about those milestones. That's really important about the narrative of delivery, because there is also a lot of cynicism out there and a lot of anger. People don't feel like politics can deliver. But when they look at that speech today, they can see a Prime Minister who's thinking very carefully about how he will deliver and how indeed we will deliver in government.
So take it away from Keir Starmer a bit, because I personally, I'm quite interested in the kind of art of campaigning, if you like. You know, these kind of phrases that people manage to get. I mean, you get Brexit done, for example, is the one you think of, or, you know, some of the Donald Trump ones, of course, to education for kind of Tony Blair. It's these phrases that somehow just crystallise exactly what politicians are trying to do. They kind of tell a story, don't they, Kate?
That's absolutely right. And I think that we didn't really have a phrase in the Labour election campaign about where they wanted to take the country. It was all just, we don't like the Tories. And they also didn't put out a lot of policies. So
it was the same with the Conservatives during the election campaign as well, don't you think, too? It did feel quite sort of disjointed,
I don't think there was a lot of charisma on either side, if I'm obvious. But Labour had the advantage of an incumbency and not a great record over those few years, let's face it. So it was all just don't have more Tories. And now they're in government, you still wonder, you know, what are you about? And, you know, we saw some policies today, but not an overall plan.
Are there any kind of, I guess, like historical sort of narratives or metaphors that kind of really stand out to you in politics?
Well, for me, it was change. And I grew up in the Obama era, which was all about yes, we can, and also all about change, right?
Kind of,
the sense of hope, the sense we can move this country. I think the change slogan that we had in our election was also about that. What is that change you want to deliver? But also your narrative has to fit the times within which you live. These are much more serious and much more difficult times. We haven't come, if you like, in a financial crisis after years of growth. We've come after 14 years of no growth. And so actually this idea of, like, you have to fit your narrative to your times, I think is what you saw from Keir Starmer today.
What would you say to that?
Well, change is always a narrative, or you can't afford change. That is basically what most elections are about. I think it's interesting that he's still running with change because he is in the government now, so he's in the driving seat. So he's got to now make that really work. I mean, I think it is difficult. I think getting the right phrase is important. Campaigning is important. And what I found from my years in politics is some people are great at campaigning and don't do a great job at the actual governing. And other people are the other way round. You don't always get the same thing.
It's two different skill sets, isn't it? Let's be honest.
In a way.
It definitely is.
In a way.
Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub.
If I keep coming back here, I could be the next James Bond.
He wasn't being serious, I should say. The Prime Minister taking to the stage at Pinewood Studios. But which of the iconic films made there best reflects the speech today? Grab your popcorn, we are off to the cinema.
Coming up on the UK tonight, plenty of promises from the PM. But will Sir Keir Starmer's milestones be a millstone around the neck of his government? Plus, why the long wait for weight loss drugs? With a warning, a new wonder drug will take 12 years to roll out on the NHS. We'll speak to someone who had to go private to see the benefits. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
A police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
It's a Premier League double derby weekend on USA. First, on Saturday, Liverpool look to strengthen their title run against Everton in the Merseyside derby. Then Sunday, Chelsea aim to stay in the hunt when they face Tottenham in a London derby.
And this meeting might shift the dial in that derby.
The Premier League double derby weekend on USA.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
Yeah. With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated? The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See.
This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's
Supply line right into the...
here in Los Angeles.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the setting of today's speech by the Prime Minister was at Pinewood Studios, where some of the UK's big box office hits like Harry Potter and Star Wars were created. And, of course, Keir Starmer couldn't resist taking advantage of his cinematic surroundings with a quick quip inspired by another famous franchise that was filmed there.
You know, the leader of the opposition thinks that if you do a couple of shifts in McDonald's, then you can become working class. So by that logic, if I keep coming back here, I could be the next James Bond.
There you go, Keir Starmer next James Bond. I'll have to say, I mean, they haven't cast the next James Bond, right? So you never know. Could be in the running. But given Pinewood's long list of popular productions, we thought we'd ask a panel what movie they think best reflects the Prime Minister's speech today. So we're kind of like, you know, looking for inspiration for films filmed in Pinewood Studios that could fit with Keir Starmer. Kate, should we go to you first? I think we can actually show the film posters as well. I don't know what they are, I have to say, but...
Well, I went with Les Miserables, just because I think it is all quite downbeat and it would be nice to have a bit more sunny uplands. So that was my choice.
I mean, there's a bit of revolution in Les Mis, right? Manning the barricades,
yes,
fighting for justice.
No, great music, great, you know, solidarity, purpose. So in a way, there's a bit of hope
What
there.
do you reckon? So... Would you take Les Mis, or do you think...
Oh, not with that title, no.
It was a bit of a disappointing film as well. I love the musical, but the film itself I thought was perhaps not so great. So we've got Les Mis, and you've got another one, Kate. What was the other one you suggested?
Well, I noticed that they also made a film, Gravity, and the reason why I went for this one was there's a lot of talk about black holes, obviously, from Labour at the moment.
Oh, yeah, I like it. Oh, it's good.
Yes. So that was my thinking on that one.
See, so the £22 billion black hole
exactly.
is
That took me to gravity.
No, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. That's actually very good.
She's looking a bit lost out there in space, you see.
Yeah, I can go with that. I can go with that. What's your suggestions then?
So mine was Great Expectations.
Oh, very nice.
Now, my team suggested Kick-Ass, which I thought was quite good, but this is what we went for.
So, Great Expectations. And talk to me, why did you go for Great Expectations? Then?
Mostly the title, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah. Have you seen the film? Or?
I've not seen the film. I looked at the title. But look, a story about difficult circumstances with a happy ending. What more could you want?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And also, I guess, the expectations on the Labour government as well. You said that you had another one as well.
Yeah, my team suggested Kick-Ass, which I didn't know if it was appropriate. But I got it out anyway, so there we go.
I like it. I think we can say that on TV. We're just about all right. A couple of other ones, other Pinewood films we could have had. Mission Impossible, The Importance of Being Earnest, A Little Chaos is quite a nice one as well. My favourite one, I think, was suggested by Emily, my producer, No Time to Die, which I think is what every politician basically is aiming for, right? Not dying when you're giving your big speech. So, yeah, we've had I don't know, what did you reckon, Pinewood Studios? Decent location for a speech, or...?
I think it's a great location for a speech, and it's, by the way, a great enterprise. And if you think it's had a lot of money from taxpayers supporting it, it's a great industry. So yeah, no, it was good.
Yeah, I'd agree, and a nice big hall as well. Who doesn't like it?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you on the panel this evening. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you on Monday at 7. Up next, though, it is UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. And then, of course, at 9 p.m, you have The World with Dominic Waghorn this evening. But I'll see you on Monday. Have a great Friday and a great weekend.